was still wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The firm was one of those places that never really slept. Not because anyone was passionate about staying late, but because leaving before your senior associate felt like a statement. I'd learned that in my first week. I was 28, 8 months into my articling position at a mid-sized firm in downtown Toronto, and I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a granola bar I'd eaten standing over the photocopier at 2 in the afternoon. It was a Wednesday in late February, the kind of February day that makes you genuinely question every decision that led you to living in Ontario. The wind off Lake Ontario had been cutting through my coat all morning, and by the time I got to the office at 7:30, my fingers hadn't fully warmed up until almost 10. I'd had a file go sideways that morning. Not catastrophically, nothing was on fire, no one was suing us, but the kind of sideways where a senior partner notices, where your name gets mentioned in a tone you don't want your name mentioned in. The associate I reported to, a woman named Priya who was sharp and fair but not warm, had come by my desk at 11 and said quietly, "We'll talk about this later," and then later never came, which was somehow worse than if it had. By 1 o'clock I was starving and I hadn't moved from my desk in 5 hours. The building had a cafeteria on the second floor. Not a great one, but functional. Sandwiches wrapped in plastic, soup from a bain-marie that had been there since the 90s, that kind of place. I went there maybe twice a week when I couldn't justify the 11 minutes it took to walk somewhere with actual food. I got in line, grabbed a bowl of tomato soup and a roll that looked like it had been baked sometime that morning. Possibly. I was standing at the till, already looking at my phone, already thinking about the memo I had to finish before 4, when I heard the man in front of me. He was older, mid-70s I'd guess. He was wearing a heavy wool coat, the kind you don't see much anymore, dark green with actual brass buttons. He had a small tray with a cup of tea and a slice of banana bread on it. That was all. And the woman at the till was telling him, in the patient and slightly louder voice people sometimes use with the elderly, that his card had been declined. He tried it again, tap, then insert. She shook her head. He started patting his coat pockets. Inside breast pocket, then the outer ones. He had that particular stillness that comes over people when they're embarrassed and trying not to show it. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I must have left my wallet upstairs." "That's all right," she said, in a tone that suggested it was not particularly all right and that she had things to do. I don't know why I did what I did next. I want to say it was some generous impulse, some warmth of spirit. But honestly, I was tired and I just wanted to move. I tapped my card before I'd really thought about it. "I've got it," I said. He turned around. He had gray eyes, clear and sharp in the way that some older people's eyes are. Like everything else has settled, but the eyes stayed the same as they were at 40. "You don't need to do that," he said. "It's tea and banana bread," I said. "Please." He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded, once, the way people nod when they've decided accepting gracefully is better than making a fuss. "Thank you," he said. Not effusively, just "thank you." I paid for my own soup and roll and went to find a table. I sat in the corner where I always sat, by the window that looked out onto the alley rather than the street, which wasn't scenic but was at least quiet. I ate quickly. I checked my emails. I thought about the memo. I thought about Priya saying, "We'll talk about this later." I went back upstairs. I forgot about it almost immediately. The rest of that week was the kind of week that takes things out of you. The memo got done. The sideways file got somewhat unsideways, though not completely. I worked late Thursday and came in Saturday morning for 3 hours to catch up on something else. By Sunday night, I was in that particular state where you're tired enough that you stop feeling tired and just feel sort of blankly alert, like a lamp left on in an empty room. The following week was calmer. I got through it. I stopped thinking about Priya's "we'll talk about this later." February turned into March, which in Toronto means the snow gets grayer rather than disappearing. It was about 3 weeks later when my office phone rang. Not my cell, the actual desk phone, which almost no one used. It was the receptionist on the main floor. She said that Jeffrey Hartwell was asking for me. I didn't know that name. I said so. She said he was in the lobby. I went downstairs, not sure what I was walking into. There was a man waiting by the front desk, a younger man, maybe 40, in a good suit. He introduced himself and told me he was my colleague's assistant and that he had something for me. He handed me an envelope, thanked me for my time, and left. I stood in the lobby and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy cream paper. The handwriting was deliberate and slightly old-fashioned, the kind people used before everything was typed. It said, "You showed me a kindness 3 weeks ago in the building cafeteria when my card failed. I didn't have a chance to properly thank you then. I'm told you're articling here. If you would ever find it useful to speak with someone who has spent some time in this profession, I would be glad to have that conversation. My assistant's card is enclosed." The card said, "Ronald Ashworth, KC. I stood there for a moment longer than I probably needed to. KC. King's Counsel. In Ontario, that designation isn't handed out easily. It goes to lawyers who have made a significant contribution to the profession, to the law itself, to the people it serves. I knew the name, in the way you know names that appear in the footnotes of cases you've read, and the acknowledgments of textbooks, in the kind of profiles that run in the Law Society Gazette that you skim and don't quite finish. He was in our building, I realized slowly. Not at our firm, we were on floors 12 through 15. But the building had other tenants. He must have come down to the cafeteria, same as me, for the simple reason that it was there and it was convenient. I didn't tell anyone about the note. I'm not sure why. It felt like something I should sit with for a bit before I did anything with it. I emailed the assistant that evening. I said I'd be grateful for the conversation and that I was available most mornings before 9 or after 5, given my schedule. The assistant wrote back within an hour and said, "Mr. Bitt Ashworth would be pleased to meet me for coffee the following Thursday at 7:30 at a place called the Pilot on Cumberland Street if that worked." I said it worked. I didn't sleep well Wednesday night. I got there early, I'm always early, and sat in the corner with a black coffee and tried to look like someone who had conversations like this regularly. He arrived at 7:28. He was wearing a different heavy coat, charcoal this time, same brass buttons. He sat down without ceremony and ordered tea from the server who appeared, and then he looked at me with those clear gray eyes and said, "So? 8 months in. How is it?" I answered honestly. I don't know why, I hadn't planned to. I said it was hard in ways I hadn't expected, that I'd imagined the difficulty would be intellectual, and it turned out most of it was something else. Figuring out the social architecture of a place, understanding which silences meant what, learning to absorb criticism without letting it flatten you, and to learn from it without letting it change your judgment of your own work. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Who gave you the file that went sideways last month?" he asked. I hadn't told him about a file going sideways. I realized slowly that he must know people at the firm, that this was a smaller world than I'd been thinking of it as. "Priya," I said. He nodded. "She's good," he said, demanding, "but the ones who demand things of you are usually the ones who think you can meet them." He paused. "The file going sideways, was it your error or a circumstance?" "Mostly circumstance," I said, "partly me." "What was the part that was you?" I told him. He asked a few questions. He didn't tell me I was wrong or that I was right. He just asked questions until I'd talked myself to a place where I understood it more clearly than I had before I walked in. That was the conversation. We talked for an hour and 10 minutes. He paid for the coffee and the tea and wouldn't hear otherwise. When we stood to leave, he said, "Come back in a month if you want, or don't. Either way." I said I would come back. I did come back. We met 4 more times over the following 5 months. Not every meeting was as useful as the first one. Some were more ordinary, just 2 people talking about the work, but each one left me with something I hadn't had going in. He never did anything dramatic. He didn't call anyone on my behalf or advocate for me in any room I wasn't in, or if he did, I never knew about it. He didn't change the trajectory of my career in any single definable moment. What he did was talk to me like someone whose judgment was worth developing. That sounds small. It wasn't. There was one afternoon, in June, when I was sitting across from him at the same table we always took at the Pilot, and I told him about something that had happened at work that week. Priya had dressed me down in front of 2 other articling students over a procedural error that, by any reasonable measure, was minor, not major. Minor, the kind of thing that gets corrected and moved past. But she made it larger than it needed to be, and I'd had to stand there while she did it and then go back to my desk and pretend I was fine. I told him this carefully, trying not to sound like I was complaining, trying to be fair to her. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I've thought about since. When I was a junior, he said, there was a partner who used humiliation as a management tool. Very effective, he thought, very efficient. One correction, loudly done, keeps everyone else in line. He picked up his tea. He retired about 15 years ago. I've spoken to people who worked for him over the course of his career. Not one of them remembers what he taught them. Every one of them remembers how he made them feel. He set the cup down. That's the full ledger of what he built. I didn't say anything. You're gonna have to decide, he said, what kind of lawyer you want to be. Not in the sense of what kind of cases, in the sense of what kind of presence, what you leave in a room after you've been in it. I thought about that for the rest of the summer. My articling ended in September. I was offered an associate position at the firm, which I accepted. Priya told me on my last day as an articling student that I'd done good work. She said it once, plainly, and then moved on to something else. I appreciated it more than I expected to. I had one last coffee with Ronald Ashworth in October. He told me, winding down, not retiring entirely, but reducing. He still took calls, still consulted on a few files that interested him, but the years of full practice were behind him, and he seemed at peace with that in the way that some people are at peace with the seasons changing. He asked how I was settling into the associate role. I said it was different, that something had shifted even though the building was the same and the faces were mostly the same. I was no longer the one being assessed at every turn. I was starting to be someone that other people, newer people, look to occasionally. That's the part no one really prepares you for, he said. The first time someone newer than you comes to you with a question, and they're genuinely nervous, and you realize that how you answer matters, not just the content of the answer, but the way you answer, the effect it has on them. He looked at me. What do you do with that? I thought about it. I try to remember what it felt like, I said, when I was the one asking. He nodded, and he looked genuinely pleased. Not effusively, just the way he'd nodded that first day in the cafeteria when he'd decided accepting graciously was better than making a fuss. That's enough, he said. That's really all it needs to be. There's a newer articling student at the firm now. She started in January. She's from Halifax. She's sharp in the way that makes you slightly worried for anyone who underestimates her. A few weeks ago, she came to my office door with a question about a file she'd been handed, and I could see in her face the particular anxiety of someone who isn't sure if the question is going to be received well or not. I closed my laptop. I told her to sit down. I asked her to walk me through what she understood about the file and what specifically wasn't clear. We talked for 20 minutes. When she left, she looked different than when she'd walked in. Not because I'd solved the problem for her. I mostly just asked questions until she talked herself toward the answer. But she looked like someone who'd been taken seriously, which is its own kind of thing. I thought about $7 and a cup of tea. I thought about a man in a green wool coat who had too much dignity to argue in a cafeteria line. I don't think kindness is transactional. I don't think I got anything from that morning in the cafeteria because I did something right. The world isn't arranged that way, and if it were, the lesson would be too easy. You'd be kind for the wrong reasons. But I think about the full ledger. What you build over time, quietly, in small moments, in the way you answer when someone comes to your door nervous, in whether you close the laptop or leave it open, in whether you make the correction loudly for the audience or quietly for the person. Ronald Ashworth didn't remember me because I paid for his tea. I think he just saw someone having a rough day who did a decent thing anyway, and he thought that was worth something. And then he spent 5 months trying to make sure I thought it was worth something too. I still take my coffee breaks in the second floor cafeteria. I still sit by the window that looks into the alley. I still eat faster than I should. But I look up now. I notice when someone in front of me is having trouble. I have a card on me. It's a small thing. It's not a policy or a program or a philosophy. It's just paying attention to what's happening in front of you and deciding that it matters enough to do something about it, even when you're tired, especially when you're tired. That's the whole thing, really. That's all it is. I've thought about that Wednesday in February more times than makes sense for a Wednesday. I was exhausted, I was behind, I was running on cold coffee, and the particular anxiety of someone who'd just heard we'll talk about this later and hadn't heard anything since. I wasn't in a generous mood. I want to be honest about that. I didn't pay for Ronald Ashworth's tea because I was feeling warm toward the world. I did it because it was $9 and it was faster than waiting for him to sort out his card, and because somewhere underneath the tiredness I still believed, quietly, that letting someone stand there embarrassed when you could fix it in 30 seconds wasn't something I wanted to do. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the outcome, not the envelope, not the meetings at the pilot, not the things he said that I still find myself thinking about. The part I come back to is the fact that I did it on a bad day, because I think that's actually the only day that counts. Anyone can be decent when they have enough sleep and nothing is going wrong. The question is what you do when you're depleted and the world is asking something of you anyway. What Ronald Ashworth gave me over those months of early morning coffee was something I didn't have a name for until much later. He gave me a model of what it looks like to think carefully and act with integrity, not as a performance, not because someone was watching, but because that's just how he moved through things. The questions he asked me weren't designed to make me feel managed. They were designed to help me see my own situation more clearly. He trusted that if I could see it clearly enough, I'd figure out what to do. That kind of faith in someone's capacity to reason their way through difficulty, that's not a small thing to give a person. And then there was what he said about Priya, about the partner who used humiliation as a tool, about the full ledger. I've worked with people who lead by making others feel small, and I understand the logic of it. It's efficient, it's dramatic, it creates compliance. But compliance isn't the same as growth, and it isn't the same as loyalty. And it certainly isn't the same as someone bringing you their best thinking because they trust you with it. The ledger that kind of leadership builds is real. It just doesn't say what the person building it thinks it says. What I've tried to do since, imperfectly, inconsistently, but genuinely, is close my laptop when someone comes to my door. Ask the question instead of giving the answer. Notice when the person across from me is carrying something heavy and make it a little easier to set down, even briefly. These are not grand gestures, they don't look like much, but I think they accumulate into something the way Ronald Ashworth's whole manner accumulated into something I couldn't quite name but could feel the shape of. The $9 didn't buy me anything. I want to be clear about that. What happened afterward happened because he was the kind of person who noticed when he'd been treated with decency and thought it meant something. And I was in a position to receive it because I'd been doing the work. Imperfect, grinding, exhausting work with enough honesty to have something real to say when he asked me a hard question at 7:30 in the morning. That's the thing about cause and effect in a life. It's rarely clean. It's not that one good act produced one good result. It's that small acts of decency, done consistently, build a certain kind of person. And that person, if they're paying attention, if they're willing to be honest about their mistakes, if they keep showing up even when they're tired, eventually finds themselves in rooms they couldn't have predicted. Not because the universe rewarded them, but because of who they became in the process of trying. I still eat lunch in the second-floor cafeteria sometimes. I still sit by the window that looks into the alley. I still look up.